indicated they wanted
recording in progress
through the different activities. End of life of vehicles have been flagged by many countries during the development as a high priority. This is why we have this meeting today, to see how we can solve this issue, of course, in each country, but also learn from each other. There's a lot of activities going on. There's France has financed some ELV centers in Dominican Republic, for example, so we can learn from what the experience they have here. But also in the COP, there's discussions on how to deal with the end of life of vehicles more globally. So other countries not present in the island program, but participating to the island program, can learn also about what we're doing. Actually, I have a meeting at 3 today on batteries. So we will talk about what we have talked about now. So we learn. I'll let them know. I'll let the meeting participant know what the islands program is doing. So that would be it for now. Thank you.
Thanks, Ludo. Okay, everyone. So thank you so much, Ludo and Anil, for the introductory remarks. Now it's my turn to tell you a little bit about islands and end-of-life vehicles, and then introduce the case studies and the presentations from our regional centres. So as we know, or most of us know, end-of-life vehicles contain POPs, tetraBDE, PentaBDE, DecaBDE, and the plastic components, dashboards and steering wheels, and in the seats, which are treated with brominated foam retardants. Our islands, as Ludo mentioned, is a global program, and we have global environmental benefit targets that we need to achieve. And within that, we are hoping to dispose of over 200,000 tonnes of contaminated materials in the program. That doesn't mean all vehicles, but the vehicles fit within this section of the program. So both the Caribbean and the Pacific child projects have individual end-of-life vehicle activities. And the coordination, communication and knowledge management project, that's the global project that Ludo mentioned, and the project that I lead is also responsible for some activities on ELVs. Specifically, at CCCAM, we're responsible for identifying best practices on key issues and sharing knowledge across SIDS. So this really is the first meeting we've had where we're aiming to share technical knowledge across SIDS. So we're responsible for identifying best practice on e-waste, end-of-life vehicles, which we're here to discuss today, used oil and plastics. Now, many of you know, and I must thank you for consulting with Nahida, our consultant who worked on end-of-life vehicles. She surveyed all of your countries and spoke to many of you I know throughout 2022 while we were trying to understand the situation and baseline the situation and look for best practices in SIDS on end-of-life vehicles. So islands is involved in end-of-life vehicles because they contain POPs. But it's really important to note that most of the end-of-life vehicle stakeholders have very little knowledge of POPs in vehicles. SIDS, small-scale recyclers, are driven to involvement in end-of-life vehicles because of the scrap metal value. The SIDS population by the unsightliness, governments by the environmental hazards and the need to depollute, as well as the difficult to manage bulky waste that are filling up landfills. And global stakeholders working on depollution of the ELVs rarely mention POPs. In fact, depollution is usually talking about the fluids and the other hazardous products in vehicles, but it doesn't always mention POPs. So there's a lot of work ahead for islands globally on end-of-life vehicles. We need to raise awareness on the POPs content of the ELVs. We need to ensure that depolluting activities include POPs contaminated materials. And we need to create an enabling environment for collecting, dismantling, and export. So this is an Islands Working Group meeting and essentially an opportunity to share and exchange what we know and we've found so far. So we're going to be having a presentation from Rachel from the Caribbean on end-of-life vehicle activities, upcoming study chair, from Josh, who's here from SPREP, on a recent ELV economic assessment study. And we're going to present to you some case studies we've developed through Nahida's work on St. Lucia and Mauritius, and also from representatives from Mauritius and St. Lucia's. So thank you so much for joining us today, and now I'll hand the floor to Rachel for her presentation. Over to you, Rachel.
All right. Thank you so much, Melanie. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Rachel from the BCRC Caribbean. Good to be with you all here today. So we just wanted to talk briefly about the work that we're undertaking in the Caribbean region with 11 of the project countries. Of course, we are conducting the overall program in the region with 12 project countries, but understandably, older vehicles mean a lot in the Cuban context, and so we have 11 project countries in the activities. So the first objective of the activity that we've built and we are just starting up, in that the inception activity happens later this month, is to assess the management capacity that we have in the region at the regional level in terms of how we can bring regional solutions, but getting a better understanding of what's happening nationally in order to inform how we can move forward with best available techniques and best environmental practices. And so on the next slide, after we've done a bit of work in the regional context, we're hoping to narrow down the activities to 5 project countries where there is a greater enabling environment to move forward with the improvement of the technical and economical capacity and feasibility to improve on what the current situation is nationally. And so, in a nutshell, we're starting the activity later this month in May. We start with an inception phase where we introduce the consultants to the project working groups in each of the project countries to present on what the intention is in terms of the work plan and the underground activities that should happen. And attached to this, we talk a bit about a study tour that we're hoping to conduct in June of this year. And then we move into the assessment phase, and this is here we'd be looking closely at what's happening in terms of the technical, economical, social, and legal capacity of the countries as it relates to the management of end-of-life vehicles in order to inform how we move forward. Then at the regional level, we would be doing some training and capacity building, but then narrowing down the activity to the national level in the 5 selected project countries. And this will be informed by a criteria in terms of the level of readiness of the countries to advance with the project work, where we will be looking closely at the existing treatment facilities in the 5 countries and how we can improve and enhance their technical capacity there. An interesting part of this is the study tour that we're executing during the inception phase. And here we've recognized that there is regional capacity that we can bring to the project countries and showcase in terms of the existing capacity. So we had Ludo mentioned the Guadeloupe entities that are currently making strides in the region with end-of-life vehicle management, and a facility that's up and coming in the Dominican Republic. And so what we're hoping to do is bring our waste management teams together in Guadeloupe to hear a bit more about what technologies exist and how these solutions can be implemented regionally. And then we'd hear a bit more about the operations that's happening in the Dominican Republic. So consideration can be given to this as we move forward with trying to elaborate a regional solution. And another part of the work that we're doing in accordance with the programmatic approach is that we're looking at the development of knowledge products, and we have started work in terms of promoting end-of-life vehicle management. We just started up the development of an informational video that will supplement some of the training material and promote end-of-life vehicle management in an environmentally sound manner as we progress. And we have a video clip from the draft of the video that we'd just like to show you guys today. Is the audio coming through?
Sorry about the technical difficulty. The audio will be very small, as you can from here.
Try.
Yes.
No?
We share the link to the video later and
Okay, sure, yes, no worries. Oh, so this is it for my presentation. Thank you very much. Thank you, Melanie.
Thank you, Rachel. And so what we'll do is share the video.
Thank you
link
much
just so
for
that everybody
right.
can
Understand. Thank you very much.
Now we have a presentation from Josh from Spread. Joshua Sam is the Hazardous Waste Management Advisor for the Secretary of the Pacific Regional Environment Programme, and he's going to be telling us about a recent economic feasibility study on end-of-life vehicle management. It was completed. Over to you, Josh.
Thanks, Mel, and good afternoon, colleagues. So one of the first activities for the Pacific Child projects was a initiative on end-of-life vehicles. We are fortunate in the region that we have Swire Shipping as a partner, a significant partner. They have committed around 35 million in co-financing, and that is dedicated towards end-of-life vehicle recycling in the Pacific. Year one, we engaged consultants from the Pacific to undertake what we're calling a pre-feasibility study. That study identified three countries in the region that could possibly potentially serve as regional hubs, being Papua New Guinea, Fiji, and Samoa, three of our biggest countries. And so as a result of that particular study, we then commissioned a follow-up study, an economic viability study, and we asked the consultants to zero in on these three countries and try to tell us which of these three countries would be the most viable. And so they landed on Fiji, and we sent them to Fiji, and they conducted a study there, and I'm happy to share the results of that study. Thank you. Next slide. Just some graphics for you to see visually the issue in our beautiful region. Next slide. The key findings of that economic viability study. Some of the requirements that we will need in order to set up a regional recycling facility in the Pacific is land, obviously. We've been talking with the Suva City Council. They have identified an industrial portion of land that could be possibly used for this facility. We will need some investments into equipment that are necessary for dismantling, depolluting, and collecting all of this, getting them ready for export. And the study also estimated that establishment costs of that facility are around the range of 3.5 million US. Just a note up there that the fixed costs don't change. So the throughput, the volume of ELVs that are coming through the facility would be key to the overall cost of running that facility. Next slide, please. In terms of the variable costs associated with the dismantling facility, obviously the raw materials, the labor costs, utilities, maintenance and repairs. And just like all of you seeds, we also have this issue of transporting from outer islands to main islands, and then from main islands to where this regional facility will be situated. And the variable costs from this study came up to around 140 US per ELV. Next slide, please. Some of the technical challenges. So as we've been seeing, POPs mainly contained in older models of vehicle, but as we see newer models being produced, there are fewer pops, but then these new hybrids are also presenting new challenges because they do come with some additional waste items like the lithium ion batteries, nickel metal hydrates. Then one of the biggest challenges that was identified through the study was what to do with the shredder residues that will come out from depolluting the vehicles. This is a complex and challenging waste stream. I've found very little literature available on how to deal with shredder residue. So yeah, we'll need to continue, I guess, investigating this, and also how to deal with other components of the vehicle that present also chemicals that we've been hearing about at these COPs, plastics, tires, microplastics that are in the tires, and so forth. Next slide, please. And then key findings, the last one and the next steps is, so the study concluded that in the Pacific, ELVs at the moment not economically viable. There is a shortfall, and the shortfall is around $20 per car. That's not that much, but they've highlighted some conditions that need to be in place in order to make it viable. And one of them is for all our countries who have advanced recovery fee systems, or some kind of a sustainable financing mechanism. So one of our biggest challenges now is working with our member countries through some of our sister projects on helping to set up those kind of systems for them, so that recycling of ELVs can eventuate in the Pacific. Although it is not financially viable at this stage, there are significant non-revenue benefits, and then these are not accounted for in the cost models in terms of less pollution, as well as less demand on landfill space, and not only landfill space, but as you see from the photos, these vehicles, these ELVs are taking up rare space in some of our countries, especially those very small ones that do not have land. So our next steps now is SWIA has been talking to a global metal recycler who is keen, who wants to co-invest with SWIA. They are looking to enter the Pacific market. And then Mel and the team and SWIA and the team, we want to work on, help SWIA work on some kind of a pitch, and for our team at SWIA to then take the pitch to the SWIA board. And yeah, fingers crossed, it's a good pitch, and SWIA makes a financial decision to invest in a ELV recycling facility for the Pacific, and then we will be more than happy to share the outcome of that with the rest of it. Thank you.
Thanks, Josh. That was great. And I'm aware there's probably a few questions for Rachel and Josh. So if anyone did want to intervene with a question now, you can take a few questions and then move on to the questions.
It's not a question, but just maybe just probably saying on the hybrid vehicles, and the, I mean, we've had about 20 years or so of hybrid and electric vehicles coming onto the market, and in the short few years, it'll also become a waste, and none of us have the infrastructure, particularly with batteries, to deal with it. And so, UNEP has been working since just someone on an e-mobility global program that has sits in them as well, but that was really to on the climate change side, to advance the use of electric vehicles in countries to replace combustion engine-based vehicles, and there's some other reasons to use the battery as storage. before or period of pushing back to the grids as a way to manage your grid as well. But they've recently submitted a new program in GEFI. It's been submitted for this consideration in June of program in a couple weeks from now, a month from now. That recognizes that, okay, so we had all these vehicles coming into the system in developing countries. Some of them, just like the vehicles that we traditionally imported into SID, which was essentially second-hand vehicles, or second-hand electronic vehicles, that there is going to be another issue that needs to be dealt with these vehicles. While it's helping you eliminate the use of fossil fuels, as now you also have a quite a complicated technical waste stream to deal with the capacitors and things. So we've built in a chemicals component into that new program that will hopefully help build that structure to deal with the vehicles. So the end of life work that you and the life vehicle work that you guys are working on the islands complements well with the work that program was. It's not only some facilities that we can explore. It's also a UNEP-led program, so that there will definitely be abilities to cross-pollinate and with pollution. So that's
Yes, please go ahead.
Sorry, I didn't hear it clearly.
Joshua.
But I am
Joshua.
Joshua.
Yeah.
So I listened to your presentation carefully, and I understand the viability assessment that you've done. I'm assuming that you guys considered the recyclable component of ELVs and the possible funding or revenue that have to generate. But I was thinking, in terms of the approach that you guys are taking a more centralized approach where you want to establish a facility and you want to bring the ELVs to this one central location. I was thinking if consideration was given for a more decentralized approach where you recycle what is recyclable and then you stockpile those items of vehicles that are harmful, right? That contains harmful chemicals. So with that way, I think that so you have all the small islands, you'll be able to stockpile, and then maybe every 5 years you have one carbon vessel go around, collecting it and then taking it somewhere for carbon disposal as a more, if we consider that approach as a more viable option than to have one centralized system. And I see in your presentation that you had pyrolysis, I think you had decontamination, etc. So I just wanted to know if that was an option, if that was considered, and maybe compare contrast with different approaches. Thanks.
Yeah, we did ask the consultant to investigate those options for us, and they came up with this option. But we did definitely consider that. I think the challenge that the consultants identified for us was most of our member countries just do not have the volumes to make this viable. So for us, a regional solution kind of would make it work for us in terms of bringing everything into a centralized facility, consolidating throughput, making up the numbers to meet demand, and then sending that out. But they did consider trying to do this perhaps with bigger countries, and then try to kind of expand it. But yeah, they came up with this as the most viable option. I guess the study also made some other assumptions. The initial study that this study was based on was conducted through COVID, so we needed to also make sure that the numbers were a little accurate. So there's some unknowns, and we're hoping that as we go along, things can get a little clear, and some decisions can be made. Yeah.
Yeah, I think, and just to add to that, when Swire brought this idea to the table about investing in end-of-life vehicles with a commercial, at least break-even approach to their operations, their vision was a mobile crusher. to move around the region. The consultants tested that model and didn't find it viable. And I think, you know, the report's sort of calling this Fiji proposed facility a regional facility. You could also consider it a pilot that was then replicated, because the point is to get it to a position where it recovers the costs, and then SWI are interested in expanding. So I'm not actually convinced we'll ever see shiploads of vehicles traveling to Fiji for depollution and recycling. I think that it's early days and it remains to be seen, but what we're trying to do is get the most favorable economic model that allows SWI's board to engage and actually to spend that money on this project. So
Can I ask a follow-up question?
absolutely, please go on.
Yeah, you spoke about a cost recovery mechanism. I was wondering what were you guys thinking with this, what's the idea? How do you recover costs in terms of what you do? Do you charge people for collection and disposal, or?
Yeah, I mean, that's an interesting question. Like Mel said, this was initially a commercial venture from SWI. So, but we are yet to get to the stage where we talk about cost recovery, you know, how SWI gets the ELVs of the people who own them, you know, then in terms of benefit sharing, what do the countries get, how much that SWI get. We are yet to get to that stage.
But this study determined that an advanced disposal recovery fee is absolutely necessary to ensure that there is an impetus to take that vehicle into the recycling center, because one of the biggest costs in the variable costs is the cost of moving the vehicle from wherever it's dumped, be it someone's front yard or at the landfill, to a center. So that's what we're looking at.
And maybe they can kind of establish a fee for importation of vehicle, and then you have to create a fund, and then you fund.
That's what we mean when we say advanced disposal recovery fee or sustainable financing model. Exactly that.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Please go ahead.
Okay, thank you very much. Just start by thanking for the invitation for this to discuss this very important subject. And just a couple of comments and perhaps a question. Because in fact, we in our country, we were not perhaps so aware of this problem, because sometimes what we see is that vehicles, end-of-life vehicles, are used or reused in some ways, and we don't come up to see really what happens with the other parts of the vehicle. Perhaps it ends up in the landfills or somewhere else that we are not in control. I think that this is very important, in fact, for us to be aware of this and maybe with these projects, we can really try to solve this problem. My question would be perhaps to know if in this region or your region, if this problem is so prominent in the way that it gave you this, or it prompted you to come with this project, and whether is there any best practices or projects of installations that collect this kind of vehicles, end-of-life vehicles?
Right, in the Caribbean region, thank you. It varies country to country as it stands right now. So it did come through as a need regionally, and hence we designed this activity this way. But in the following presentation, I believe we'd hear about a case study from St. Lucia where there are some good systems in place. So it varies country to country, but we have a good example, I would say, in St. Lucia. Yeah, thank you.
Absolutely.
So,
Go ahead.
thank you. I'm from South Tome and Principe,
Well,
and like Cape Verde, we have the same problems. So we are a small island in West Africa, and we do not know, and we do not have facilities to deal with end-of-life vehicles. So you mentioned that maybe if there is a facility for the region, we could deal with that, with them. So I don't know, how can we deal with it, with this? Because I think sending this vehicle abroad is very expensive, so how can we deal with this? So you have a solution for this problem?
I think I need to hand the floor to Jewel, because Jewel, you're more familiar with the design of the Atlantic project and the
Yeah.
ELVs.
We were just trying to remember which one did not
Yeah.
want it.
So no,
It was one of them.
yeah,
Guinea
they don't
Bissau.
want it, yeah, but
So for first window for you and for my colleague in Sao Tome and Principe, in the project Atlantic Islands, that is something that we designed for you. So there will actually be a pilot
in principle.
in Principe. Okay,
To
so
examine
it's
it.
maybe what we can do after is Melanie, we can share back. Because Sulisa, you know the project more than so Sulisa worked with us to develop when we developed the project for you all. But it is going to be captured because it was identified as a need when we looked at the baseline from the University of Lisbon in Portugal. And we have designed it in the project for you. So you will be getting the benefits under the Atlantic Islands Programme. Okay?
Thanks, Jewel. So that's
Sure.
something to highlight to everyone here. Sao Tome and Principe, PentaBDE and Guinea-Bissau are our most recent members of the Islands family, all being part of the Atlantic Regional Project, which is been recently approved by GEF. And this project was designed together with BCRC Caribbean. So much of this information on end-of-life vehicles is new for you guys, but a year from now it won't be so new. So we're very happy to have you here today, and welcome to the Islands family. So I think it's probably a good segue into the case studies now that I mentioned earlier. So my colleague Cohen here is going to present a couple of case studies, but just a quick overview. As I mentioned, Nihida, our consultant, surveyed the 33 island SIDS looking for best practices in end-of-life vehicle management. She was also working on e-waste, and we'll present those at another event. But the two countries that really stood out were Mauritius. They've been curbing ELV generation rates essentially. And this contributes to sort of outcome one of Islands Project about controlling the import of products with hazardous components. So Cohen's going to outline this. And we also have a case study from St. Lucia that's been licensing waste haulers and disposal facilities and engaging the private sector in end-of-life vehicle management. I should say that neither of these case studies are perfect solutions, but they are partial solutions, and they're steps along the way to this long process of managing end-of-life vehicle management, of end-of-life vehicles. So the point today is to kind of dig into what countries have done and what our research has found, and then allow Mauritius and St. Lucia to also make an intervention and then allow some additional discussion and questions on these case studies. So over to you, Karen.
Thank you, Melanie. Hi, everyone. My name is Cohen. I am supporting the private sector at the Islands Programme. So I will be presenting the individual case studies of Mauritius and St. Lucia. And like Melanie said, it's yet to become a proper knowledge product, but this is a very high-level broad overview of the things that we do. So Mauritius and the current trend about ELV in the country. So it can be very much described by the rise in new vehicle import over the past decade due to the country lacking the capacity to manufacture its own vehicles. So it has reported about 59% increase of used vehicle import between 2006 and 2016. And very naturally, this has resulted in the rise of ELVs. And to ELV management, there are multiple angles to approaching it. But the emphasis that Mauritius has taken is firstly regulating the used vehicle import and controlling the quality. So this has been addressed by a mixture of legal and fiscal measures, including age limit and tax incentives, which I will elaborate further in the next slide, coupled with development of key infrastructure. And this has resulted in a very rapid increase in not only the registered vehicles, but also import of more younger and new vehicles, as well as hybrid and electric vehicles. So overall, Mauritius, as of August 2021, is classified as very good in the UNEP unsightly vehicle regulatory environment ranking. So, how was Mauritius control the quality of fleets and hinder the generation of ELV in the first place? So there are largely three approaches. First is the legislation and legal tools. And while there are many, I have highlighted the key ones in bold. So the age limit is one of the very attractive numbers. Currently, Mauritius only imports these vehicles that are 3 years and below. And also there are environmental regulations and waste management framework, especially which is provided by the Environmental Protection Act of 2002, amended in 2008, and also the Local Government Act of 2021. Next are fiscal measures. So this has actually been a very unique sort of approach to the housing industry. So firstly, Mauritius has an excise tax, which is a taxation system based on the engine size, which is to promote a more energy efficient vehicles. And this is really interesting because it's operated hand in hand with what we call the rebate scheme, or more specifically the levy and rebate of tax based on the CO2 emissions of the vehicle. So let's say if your vehicle has a very good CO2 emission, then you will get a rebate, and this rebate amount will be deducted from the excise tax. Whereas if your vehicle has a rather poor CO2 emission, then it will be imposed as levy, which should be added onto the excise tax, resulting in higher tax payments. It also has tax incentive for cleaner fuel vehicles such as hybrid and electric cars, resulting in a reduction of the annual road tax. And last but not least, there is infrastructure. So there's a general and solid waste management in Mauritius. It's currently overseen by the Ministry of Environment, Solid Waste Management and Climate Change, specifically through the Solid Waste Management Division. Currently, the waste collection is serviced by local authorities. Although there are private companies and individuals who are waste carriers licensed by the authorities. The waste disposal is also carried out by the Shiko Sanitary Landfill and transfer stations, which is subject to environmental monitoring. And the feasibility assessment on creating an ELV dismantling and recycling facility have also taken place, which I will elaborate in the next slide. But first, this is the table of the excise tax and the rebate scheme currently operating in Mauritius. Give me 1 second, I'll just out the water.
Let's go the one before.
Yeah, this one, yeah.
This quick.
We'll circulate the presentation, yes, Melanie? So
Yeah, we will, we'll
Yeah.
share with everyone.
Yeah.
Great. Absolutely.
Yes, so we will, circulate the competition. And one very exciting activities conducted so far also has been the feasibility study for developing an ELV facility in Mauritius. And the motivation for this has been that while Mauritius has a very good approach to curbing the generation of ELVs, there is currently no official designated ELV management system. So all practices across ELV collection, recycling, disposal specifically are just informally. And therefore there have been some inefficiencies and environmental caveat arising, especially due to the private and illegal scrap metal dealers who recycle and export the scrap metals without a depollution process. Therefore, ELV has tended to end up in many parts of unused land, roadsides, and public places. And to combat this, the Ministry for Environment has, together with Africa Rise, have conducted this feasibility study. And the recommendations arising from the study have been basically, they proposed 3 options, and one option that they assessed as the most optimal is using multiple recycling centers and existing transfer stations, such as the Lalora storage, by introducing additional equipment, because this essentially requires the least amount of investment, shorter time frame until the actual operation, and the highest internal rate of return, and other statistics have been proven useful. And it was forecasted for a practical operation for the next 10 years. And there are some recent updates in 2023 in this regard and implementing the results of the study. So I will later invite the representative from Mauritius to elaborate on this. So overall, the success factor so far in Mauritius has been a mixture of legislative measures and fiscal measures, and also coupled with the development of infrastructure and the legal climate. So as mentioned, the age limit and tax incentives have proven very useful. Also, it has an overall robust existing regulations via Environmental Protection Act and the Local Government Act. Also, it has an overarching control of the quality of imported used vehicles by the measures mentioned, and the feasibility assessment has made progress towards actually creating a designated ELV management system and facility. Then in contrast, what are the remaining challenges? So in the very first slide, I gave you the statistics on the rising number of used vehicle import. However, there have not been many data on the ELVs itself. So there is a lack of official data to begin with. And as mentioned, so far, there's no designated ELV management system and facilities. So the overall sort of management comprising collection, dismantling, recycling, and disposing ELVs need to be reassessed and implemented based on the recommendations of the feasibility study. And also it needs to address the inefficiency arising from the practice of the local authorities and also the misaligned sort of and ad hoc practices of the private waste carriers and recyclers who are also experiencing the challenges such as limited financial resources, lack of depollution and environmental due diligence, technical training, high cost of labor, transportation, and the list remains. So this has been a very broad overview of the Mauritius case study. So now I would like to invite Ms. Guria from the Solid Waste Management Division from the Ministry of Environment, Solid Waste Management, and Climate Change of Mauritius. So Ms. Guria, would you like to intervene to the findings so far?
Thank you, Corinne, for sharing the findings of this feasibility study that was conducted, that started in 2021. And the final report was submitted last year in April, May 2022. So a few updates following this feasibility study. We still don't have a system in place for managing end-of-life vehicles. And as you know, Mauritius also is a small island developing state, and the issue of end-of-life vehicles is becoming an important issue, a major issue of concern for us. So, and the thing is that we have a situation where we have like vehicles which are seriously damaged, and we have an illegal system operating in Mauritius. Where we have like where they try to retrieve like valuables from end of life vehicles, and there's no depollution also or taking measures. So far, we don't have also any official disposal site for stockpiling of our end-of-life vehicles. But what the situation currently is that it is the Mauritius police force which takes charge of abandoned vehicles, and they bring it to one of our transfer station, which is found in the east of the island. And we are working following the study that was conducted by the EU Africa RISE, and we're working on putting up the system. So there were three options that you mentioned in the feasibility study. While the first option, the one that was recommended, was going for like having multiple recycling centers. We have 5 transfer stations in Mauritius, where municipal solid waste they transit before going. We have 1 landfill. We have 5 transfer stations where municipal solid waste around the island. They transit through those 5 transfer stations, and they transferred into bigger truck trailers before going to the landfill. So the first option was going for multiple recycling centers at those 5 transfer stations. But when we had this report, the government, we had a working session, and we saw that having multiple centers at the transfer station would not be something very practical, because that would interfere with the operation of the transfer station. So the government now intends to invite private sector to come up with proposals for the setting up of those of one recycling facility in the country. And also the feasibility study, they came up like with some recommendations to improve the regulatory framework. So government will be like regulating the sector, and the private sector will be the one investing and offering services for the removal and dismantling and recycling of those end of life vehicles. So we have like two pieces of regulations. One is the total loss regulations, which have already been drafted by the Ministry of Land Transport and which are being vetted. And the second piece of regulation is the licensing of those of a private recycling facility in Mauritius. I also wanted to add that we have like regarding electric vehicles. There's in 2020 there was also a study commissioned by the Ministry of Energy and Public Utilities in Mauritius for a 10-year electric vehicle roadmap, and we have the findings of this consultancy study, and we're in the process of like picking up the system again to transition towards electric vehicle.
This is very interesting. And also, would you like to elaborate on the very recent act that consolidates all this management?
Yes. So so far we have like provisions pertaining to waste and hazardous waste. They work under the Environment Protection Act of 2002, which was amended in 2008, and we also have like specific provisions in the Local Government Act. The Local Government Act, it basically, it has the provisions. It mostly regulates those local authorities. So what the Solid Waste Management Division where I work, we have recently come up with Waste Management and Resource Recovery Act, which has been proclaimed 2 weeks ago. And so the idea behind this act is to regroup all the provisions pertaining to waste and hazardous waste under one single legislation. And the focus also is on moving towards circular economy.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ashley. Does anyone have a question for Ashley on Karen's presentation on Mauritius? No? Okay, we'll have additional time for questions at the end. Okay, so now we're going to move on to a brief overview of the situation in St. Lucia.
Yes. So this time, I was presenting the individual case study conducted in St. Lucia. So this is actually a very interesting segue from Mauritius, as we heard from Mauritius about the government's plan to engage more the private sector actors. So the key trend of ELVs in St. Lucia so far. So St. Lucia has also seen increasing vehicle ownership across the population, so resulting to over 12,000 metric tons of what they define as derelict vehicles per year, which sums up the rising ELV situation in St. Lucia. And the St. Lucia Solid Waste Management Authority, from here I will refer to it as authority for the sake of time, is very central to ELV's management in St. Lucia. But despite this oversight and administrative oversight provided by the authority, most ELVs are received and managed by the private sector providers, so including the waste haulers licensed by the authority and other private waste recyclers. So as a result of a very high private sector engagements, only about 2% of ELVs are actually received at the two waste management facility at St. Lucia. So what are the current ELV management practices in St. Lucia, and specifically the success factors so far? So St. Lucia has an overarching legislative structure in place as well. So as mentioned, the Solid Waste Management Authority, mandated by the Waste Management Act number 8 of 2004, provides the overarching waste and solid waste management support. So one of the key, some of the key functions they have is licensing all private waste haulers who collect waste and ELV related waste in St. Lucia. However, their licensing for private recyclers, although mandated, are not yet fully operational. However, it is planned to head into the same direction of licensing the recyclers. They also have a very clear definition of what they call derelict vehicles, meaning end-of-life vehicles, and scrap metal. They have environmental protection levy charged on certain goods entering St. Lucia, and the ELV related parts are vehicles itself, tires, white goods, and batteries. They also have conducted waste characterization study to identify the key waste. Now, so the private sector engagement can be described by the two big parties involved, which are the waste haulers and the collection companies, and the waste management / recycling companies. And to delve deeper into the overarching sort of stakeholder relations in St. Lucia on ELVs, this is a mapping of the key ELV related stakeholders within the general waste management practices in St. Lucia. And this is important because it not only provides the overarching ELV management process, but also the key stakeholders and their reasons and personal individual incentives to be part of this overarching process. So as you can see at the very center here is the authority who oversees the general solid waste management, including ELVs. It's mandated by the Waste Management Act. And based on these administrative support, the waste is first collected. And there are currently two scenarios of the ELV related waste being collected. So as a context, ELVs and its waste disposal in St. Lucia is down to individual responsibility of the vehicle owners. So the vehicle owners can contract its private waste haulers / recyclers on their own to remove ELVs in public spaces. However, because it isn't a event to leave ELV waste in public spaces, if the ELV isn't removed, then the authority steps in. And the authority provides a 7-day notice. And if the ELV waste is not collected even after the 7-day notice, the authority contracts a record service to remove and take it to the landfill, which is one of the two main waste disposal facilities, which I will elaborate further. And this program is currently operated under the authority's budget. In terms of the waste dismantling and recycling, there are private waste recyclers who recycle and export the parts to international markets such as China, Hong Kong, Taiwan, South Korea, and USA. And these are the three main private recyclers who are actively involved in exporting relevant parts such as ELVs, the scrap metals, and the new lead acid batteries. And as mentioned, the licensing of these recyclers will become operational in the near future, which we can hear more about later from the country representative. And these three companies have been experiencing a very rapidly growing business due to the rise of ELV and related waste streams very naturally. And the waste disposal facilities operated by the authority themselves are two of them. So there is the Viewport Solid Waste Management Transfer Station. The Viewport transfer station was initially a controlled waste disposal site, however, which is now converted into a transfer station. And as of August 2022, it is no longer accepting ELVs. Therefore, the ELV collected in the transfer station is directly sent to the Deglo sanitary landfill. The Deglo sanitary landfill is the main waste disposal facility in St. Lucia and currently has over 40 to 50% of the capacity left. And the annual average of the ELV related waste that is disclosed at the Deglo sanitary landfill is around 230 tons of derelict vehicles / metals, an annual average of 830 tons of tires disposed in Deglo sanitary landfill. However, as mentioned, the percentage of ELVs that are disposed at Deglo sanitary landfill only averages around 2% of all disposed waste streams at the facility. And the other stakeholders involved are the auto repair shops who repair the ELVs for the users and extend the lifespan. And due to their individual performances, they are subject to audit by the authority. So they can determine the compliance with the requirements of the Insurance Council of Indonesia. And there are vehicle importers, distributors, and recyclers who deal with basically bringing about these vehicles into the country. So as you can see, this is a very symbiotic relationship, if we can call, between the authority and the private sector actors involved and currently throughout the general waste management practices. So these have been a pretty successful relationships so far. However, the remaining challenges are also there. So the private recyclers and facilities at the big landfill especially lack certain equipment such as the ELV scrap metal compactor to maximize the kilos for exporters. And they also, the authority itself, especially lack finance. In special regard to the program, they operate in terms of removing the ELVs in public spaces. And in contrast to Mauritius, while St. Lucia has been pretty practical and efficient in managing and disposing the ELVs and recycling, there are no regulations for governing of the quality and safety of the imported use vehicles, such as age or emissions of them. And the depollution processes of the ELVs and the connection with POPs and new POPs among the private recyclers can be strengthened. And also, as an overarching takeaway, we can learn from this case that St. Lucia can actually move towards establishing a more closely integrated structure among all formal and informal public and private actors, which they can venture the public-private people partnerships and other forms of investments and managing the system overall. So again, this has been a very broad overview of the St. Lucia case so far. And if I may, I would like to invite Mr. Lesforest for his intervention on findings so far. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. First of all, let me see how I am pleased with your presentation. I think the study was a good study. Unfortunately, I got a glimpse of it at the very early hours, so I had to make some interventions. Okay, there's one thing I need to point out. You indicated that 2% of vehicles get to the landfill, but it should be the other way around. 98% of derelict vehicles get to the landfill, but it is not disposed of. When you get to the landfill, then the recyclers collect those vehicles from the landfill, the processing and nutrition. Okay, this system has been in operation for the past 15 plus years in some cases. And like you indicated, there are some tweaks that needs to be to it, but we're happy so far with the level of management of the underlying vehicles on the app. So again, good research, good study. Yes, thank you.
Thanks so much. Thank you. And just to note that these are just draft case studies at the moment. Obviously, before we finalize them, we'll be sending them to our national public in St. Lucia and Mauritius. Because your input is very important to us. As I mentioned, Nahida's study was a desktop one. I actually spoke to a lot of people on the phone, so we did collect a lot of primary research, but it's not the same as having you here in the group. So thank you very much for your patience. We do appreciate it. And now we move to the discussion section of our session. And first, I just wanted to acknowledge the presence of our President and Vice President, Kema and Dr. Christian. Great to have you here. And thank you for supporting this session. Did you want to say anything about end-of-life vehicles?
Really? I mean, happy that you guys are here. Of course, the end-of-life vehicles are related to POPs, so much happy to be here. Happy as well to hear these solutions taking place in small island states, which means hopefully that the experiences can be transferable to our different nationalities and contexts, of course, adjusted to suit, our situation. So yeah, so very happy to have this engagement and this discussion taking place. I know particularly for us in Trinidad and Tobago, this was an area we highlighted in our national implementation plan under the Stockholm Convention. And so this is a priority area of action for us. So very happy to be part of these discussions and to see the work happening on it.
Brilliant. Thanks, Kema. And Dr. Christian, did you want to offer any thoughts on end-of-life in your country or the region presentation?
Well, some years ago, we had thought about the processing of it, and they went into hiring companies to provide solutions to decontamination and other things, but it was very costly. And of course, the long-term sustainability, like, should you try to centralize it, but then the government pretty much said it would never import waste from anywhere else. So the idea of centralized or getting any other material from any other place was not something viable. But because it was primarily within the private sector and our national solid waste if it's not something that was sustainable. So that came to an end. And the issue now remains that you would have to really look at what was right long term. So hearing some of these experiences, I think would be extremely helpful for us to come up with something that is vital.
Yeah.
So we look forward to that subject.
Yeah, thanks for raising that, this issue of importing waste. Essentially, it's a big one, and something I didn't mention at the start of my presentation. The components of ELVs that contain POPs need to be disposed of in an environmentally sound manner. And according to the UNEP guidance, that is at the very least in a sanitary landfill. And Josh will correct me if I'm wrong, but the last time I thought about it, I think the only one is Nauru in Fiji. But they probably don't want to take waste from POPs waste from other countries. So it's a complicated situation everywhere, and obviously this is the cost and the technical viability of any solutions. Try. But would anyone like to ask a question to Lucia, Mauritius, or just share experiences of your countries in terms of addressing end-of-life vehicle management, the challenges you're facing? We heard from Kima that in Trinidad and Tobago was included in the national implementation plan as an issue. So this really is a time to share experiences and to ask questions and to learn from each other. Fele, how are things going in Samoa?
I have acknowledged the presentation because it really gives me some ideas on how to handle and like you in Samoa. But at the moment, I think it's important that we look into the legislation.
Yeah.
Revisit the legislation and how the ELV sits in the current legislation. I think that's a place looking at some assessments like through the coordination of flood spread to see the volume of ELV in Samoa, but I suppose that is the key point. Everything that's always closure, once we have
The scale of the problem.
But I just wonder, like, with the experiences in Mauritius, and how do you see, like, your legislations regulating, like, a household living? Because in Samoa, for example, a lot of like people just sitting, outside residential areas, and even in workshop. So just thinking of how is that, like, be incorporated into the legislations. So just wondering how your current legislation, how is that sitting in the provisions or maybe something?
I think I will. It's the kind of questions. Yeah, any question, could you respond to that?
Because you don't have a regulation things now. Because you don't have a system in place, you would study the study was completed last year. And now it's putting in the system, but this level of evaluation, so it's kind of this is the level you have it's exactly. But the thing is that there's a very category. It's like, let's say we have abandoned vehicles. So abandoned vehicles, we have different procedures for dealing with different types of, let's say, abandoned, especially the government, with the verification payment involved through the recycling facilities. Let's say we have abandoned vehicles for the utility plan, the government will have to take care of that, provided that we are not able to trace back the owners. Now, let's say we have like I was mentioning the people loss regulation. Let's say we have a situation where there's a vehicle which is beyond repair. So that will be up to the owner that you are putting up the system to be registered from the National Land Transport Authority, from the register, to ensure that the vehicle doesn't go, it's not repaired and doesn't go into the system. So these we have like we are developing like different procedures with types of like abandoned, like people loss vehicles.
Okay. I think for us, it's an interesting case because Land Transport Authority deals with vehicle, and they've got their own legislations, especially like, with the push now, like, in Samoa to strengthen agricultural development, whereby, like, the cabinet has approved like another 10 years, adding to the 10 years of vehicle importing here, like, at the moment. So you will see a lot of, like, old vehicle will be coming in the country, in which, like, the Ministry of Natural Resources I'm representing, like, needs to look into that. How can we best work together with the land control authority, so that we can come into some sort of system.
You just increase the age of,
Yes,
so because
only for vehicles that bring it in to support agriculture.
supporting agriculture.
Yes.
Okay, that's
So that's really interesting.
that's quite interesting. Because previously Samoa had quite a stringent.
Yes, only 10 years.
Yeah, and now they're.
Yeah,
allowed
and
to
now
go.
they extended like because of like the push for agriculture,
Okay.
but only for people that bring it in for agriculture, too,
Okay.
including tractors and stuff like that, and also machinery and stuff.
Okay, thanks for sharing. So Lucia, did you have some comments on regulation at the household level in response to a fellow from Samoa's question?
No, St. Lucia just have one piece of legislation, which is the Waste Management Act.
Yeah.
And it speaks to end-of-life vehicles, basically, so it's referred to as derelict vehicles. And it simply says that derelict vehicles should not be in a public place. It's an offense to have a derelict vehicle in a public place. And it basically indicates describe what a derelict vehicle is. Okay, yeah, so there's criteria to determine if the vehicle is derelict. And the owner is responsible for disposal of that vehicle. If the owner does not take responsibility for that, then therefore it gets him and it's an offense. Normally what we do is that we remove the vehicle and take it to the landfill and eventually, but in some of the cases, we will charge the owner the cost for removal
Yeah.
to the landfill.
Okay, perfect, thank you. That's really useful. Any further questions? I'm not above calling on friends.
Just maybe a comment. I'm thinking that again dealing with ELVs from a national perspective, in that the private sector plays a very key role, especially some companies. And in the private sector, we play a very key role in managing ELVs. We have a system where, again, vehicles are looked at as the resource and the source of fund.
Yeah.
And as income generating, and so people can go around and these sort of decided that I'm taking them to a central facility where they are kind of processed and exported. And so if I think something like this is to be effective in beliefs, we need to support, push, and strengthen the practice. So we have to do more. And so I think what we need to do is to ensure that they have the capacity, the infrastructure, and everything to do more. But I don't see the exporting or the processing of the contaminated products per se as something that is valuable for the region. So maybe we need to look at while the component of the vehicles that have a value, we need to strengthen that in terms of the procedures we have in the region. And we need to look at, we need to separate it, what has value and what does not have value.
Absolutely.
And then look at, maybe focus on what does not have value and decide how to deal with that. Basically. So I just want to.
No, I think that's a really brilliant intervention, because where there's momentum from the private sector, then you're in a position where you're wanting to do more in an environmentally sound manner. Now, the only reason we've been talking about exporting POPs contaminated parts is because in some countries there's no sanitary landfill where those things can be disposed of. So if police, I think you probably have a sanitary landfill. Yeah, so that export issue isn't one that you need to be too concerned about. So it sounds like it's more a process of scale up and making sure that the private sector that are operating in this field understand that the depollution is necessary, and that depollution should include the POPs containing components of a vehicle.
Yeah, that's a sector that we need to strengthen.
Exactly. So everybody's starting at a different area because it's a very complex problem. Any other thoughts? Anyone wanting to share experiences?
So I wonder if you could share some environmental legislation in that, because we are updating our legislation. So if could be possible. Yeah, I don't know if you can share it with us.
Yeah, no, I think that's
for updating.
I think that's
we
really
also have legislation regarding to the waste management or ELV vehicles in the end of life. So we need to get some information on that.
Yeah.
So it's possible. Yeah,
No, we can-
something that you may have would be interesting for us.
No, absolutely. We can certainly bring together the legislation that we know of related to end-of-life vehicles. Obviously, so we should just share the wording on derelict vehicles and how that applies to public spaces. So we can put together a catalogue of what exists in SIDS, which can be useful for you. We can include both the existing and future legislation from Mauritius and anything else that our research have found, and then offer it to you. So thank you for that suggestion. We're more than happy to do that through the CCPM project. And just to let you know that, so our website is GEFislands.org. So this is the space where we share knowledge, essentially. And this is like including the legislation from various SIDS related to end-of-life vehicles. We would do this on GEFislands.org. So after the event, I'll send out an email about that. Yes.
Okay, thank you very much. Just to say that I like very much this meeting and these presentations because it really make us aware of the things that are going on the seeds. But I think that this kind of, or perhaps it should be very important or interesting to promote meetings or even trainings to share this study case, because we can see here and we can learn with each other. And as we could see now, there are some countries that are far moved in the future with this kind of procedures, and we are far back, and we are still, for example, in our case, we have a legislation from 2015, which predicts a lot of regulations for this kind of weights, like for example, end-of-life vehicles. But we still don't have the regulations for this law. So I know that with this project that we're starting, we can move a lot and improve our regulation, perhaps, or even the knowledge or the procedures. But I think that it would be very important if we could really get together more times and share this kind of experiences and even see in the field how things are going on. Yeah, if I think that if we have the funds available, or if there's somewhere that we can try to find funds to promote this kind of initiatives, I would be very happy.
Oh, I think that's a great point. And to Rachel's presentation, the Caribbean region are doing a study tour on end-of-life vehicle management from 17th to 16th of June. It's just for 2 days, so it's a little bit short to bring people in from other regions. So what we thought we would do is collect content and videos and make sure that we publish those so that people can share, and also join the meeting virtually for the in-room, the non-field sessions of the study tour, essentially. So we'll make sure we keep providing those opportunities for each of the regions to learn from the other regions. That's our goal, that's our aim, that's what we're here for, to share and ensure that we're facilitating that ongoing exchange of information. So we have very little time before we wrap up. It's been a brilliant session. Thank you so much. I wanted to quickly tell you about the next steps for GEF Islands. We have a webinar coming up on end-of-life vehicles. It says here we're doing it on the 23rd of May, but I've just spoken to VCRC Caribbean. It will be this week, but it won't on that week, but it won't be this day. So we'll send a save the date for that. For those that haven't attended our webinars before, they're like this, but they're online. So basically we have a series of people and discussants talking about issues. We've had one on e-waste management. We've had one on sustainable waste financing. And again, we're trying to bring people who are working in these specific sectors together to share. So please do attend and join the end-of-life vehicle webinar. This will also be the launch of our community of practice on end-of-life vehicles. A lot of you in the room are already on the Green Forum. That's the greenforum.org. That's our community of practice space where we're bringing together the practitioners from SIDS who are working on these issues. So we have groups on gender, we have groups on mercury, we have a group on end-of-life vehicles that's going to be launched. We have a group on e-waste and a group on plastic. So please do join, and we'll be sharing the presentations here from today there as well as on email. We'll also be finalizing case studies, the drafts of which you've heard about today. And we'll be sharing them with country focal points before we publish them. But these are going to be published as knowledge products. And I very much take your point about the need for sharing actual legislative examples as well. So we'll make sure we integrate that into the knowledge work that we do. So that are the steps from our side. I want to thank Rachel and Josh very much for their presentations today. Rachel, did you want to take a couple of minutes just to conclude anything? You may.
No, it would have just been about the study tour and extending
did
the
it?
invitation. So thank you. Yeah.
And Josh, from your side.
Now, just to say, perhaps to the newest members of the Islands family, that we will also be doing future webinars and also training specific to dismantling of ELVs. So definitely opportunities to share those experiences with you as you find your feet in the family.
Thank you.
Welcome.
Thank you, Josh. And Yolanda, I'll give the floor to you to give the final closing remarks from on behalf of Ludo, because he's moved to the
Yes,
meeting.
sorry. Yeah, on behalf of Mr. Ludovic Bernoda, he has to go to another meeting, so he sends his apologies. But I'm Yolanda, and I am the task manager for the Caribbean projects and the global project. And I had the pleasure of working with the Atlantic colleagues during the PPG phase. So it's my first time seeing you live, so I'm very happy and happy to be here sharing this with you. Nothing, it's great to have you here and to start exchanging ideas, because we're facing the same problems everywhere. So we need to exchange this information and see what areas are in common and come up with innovative solutions. We keep seeing this theme from the GEF as well, that we have to have the coherence with policy from the government and the private sector. So it's something we really want to focus on, because obviously the GEF is providing funding, but that funding is finite. There is not enough funds in the world to be able to do all the projects and get all the benefits that we would want to. So we have to work with the private sector, because it's all of us in this boat. So we have to work it out, and we hope that through this project being 33 countries, we have a lot of heads, and let's use those to come up with new ideas and work together. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you, Yolanda.
Sorry, the Twitter site for violence and service.
Website? Site?
It's for famous too. It's for famous and best vending butler. Yeah. Thank you for coming.
Thank you.
It's welcome.
Thank you.
Well,